In the year 1046 BCE, on a cold morning near the Yellow River, the world was about to witness something extraordinary. A small force of rebels, outnumbered 4-1, prepared to face the mightiest empire in ancient China. What happened next would shatter a dynasty that had ruled for over 600 years and reshape the course of Chinese civilization forever. This is the story of the Battle of Muye, where courage, strategy, and the collapse of tyranny converged in one of history's most stunning military upsets. The Shang dynasty controlled vast territories across northern China, their bronze weapons gleaming in the hands of countless warriors, their chariots rolling across the plains like thunder. For generations, they had been the undisputed masters of the known world. Their king, Di Xin, commanded armies that could crush any rebellion with ease. Yet on that fateful day at Muye, everything changed. A small coalition of Zhou Warriors, led by King Wu, would accomplish what seemed impossible. They would bring down an empire. But how does a force of just 45,000 men defeat an army of 170,000? How do rebels armed with determination overcome professional soldiers backed by centuries of military tradition? The answer lies not just in tactics or weapons, but in the decay that had eaten away at the heart of the Shang Empire itself. This is more than just a battle story. This is the tale of how corruption destroys from within, how leadership determines the fate of nations, and how sometimes the seemingly weak can topple the mighty when justice is on their side. To understand the magnitude of what happened at Muye, we need to journey back to the decades before the battle, when the seeds of revolution were first planted in the fertile valleys of western China. The relationship between the Shang overlords and their Zhou vassals had not always been one of hostility. In fact, for generations, the Zhou had served faithfully under Shang rule, proving themselves as capable warriors and administrators. King Wen of Zhou exemplified this loyalty perfectly. When Di Xin granted him the prestigious title of Overlord of the West, Wen accepted the honor with pride. The Shang king trusted him enough to assign him the crucial task of guarding the empire's western frontier, while Di Xin himself led campaigns in the southeast. This arrangement worked beautifully for both sides. The Shang could focus on their eastern wars without worrying about their rear, while the Zhou gained prestige and autonomy in their homeland. Yet beneath this surface cooperation, tensions were building like pressure in a sealed vessel. King Wen was not just a competent administrator, he was a visionary leader who inspired fierce loyalty among his people. His reputation for wisdom and justice spread far beyond the borders of his domain. Villages that had never seen a Zhou soldier began to speak his name with reverence. Rival lords started seeking his counsel on matters both great and small. Word of his growing influence eventually reached the ears of Di Xin himself. The Shang king faced a dilemma that would prove fateful. He could continue to trust his most capable vassal, risking that Wen's power would eventually eclipse his own, or he could act preemptively to eliminate a potential threat. Di Xin chose suspicion over trust, fear over wisdom. Without warning, he ordered King Wen's arrest and imprisonment, shattering the bond that had held the two kingdoms together for generations. The imprisonment was meant to be a demonstration of power, a reminder to all vassals of who truly ruled. Instead, it became the spark that would ignite a revolution. When King Wen was finally released, he returned to his people a changed man. The faithful vassal had become a quiet rebel, his loyalty replaced by a burning determination to free his people from Shang tyranny. But Wen was no reckless revolutionary. He understood that open rebellion would be suicide. Instead, he began a careful campaign of undermining Shang authority. One by one, Wen targeted the smaller states that served as Shang allies. He did not conquer them through brutal warfare, but through diplomacy, demonstrating to their people the benefits of Zhou leadership. Villages that had groaned under harsh Shang taxation found relief under Zhou protection. Merchants who had been squeezed by corrupt Shang officials discovered fair treatment in Zhou territories. Warriors who had been treated as expendable tools found honor and respect in Zhou ranks. Each successful conversion weakened the Shang position and strengthened the Zhou cause. Di Xin watched these developments with growing alarm, but he was too distracted by his eastern campaigns to respond effectively. Besides, each individual defection seemed minor. How could the loss of a few small farming communities threaten the mighty Shang Empire? This miscalculation would prove costly. King Wen's strategy was brilliant in its patience. He was building not just an army, but a movement. Every village that chose Zhou protection became a source of recruits, supplies, and intelligence. Every defecting lord brought with him knowledge of Shang weaknesses and military positions. Most importantly, every peaceful conversion demonstrated to the wider population that the Zhou offered something the Shang could not: hope for a better future. Tragically for the Zhou cause, King Wen died in 1050 BCE, just as his careful preparations were nearing completion. The mantle of leadership passed to his son, King Wu, a young man who had grown up watching his father's patient work. But Wu faced a crucial decision. Should he continue his father's cautious approach, or was it time to strike directly at the heart of Shang power? The answer came from an unexpected source. Jiang Ziya, the brilliant strategist who had served as King Wen's closest advisor, counseled patience. The time was not yet right, he argued. The heavenly mandate to overthrow the Shang had not yet been given. Wu should wait for the perfect moment when all conditions aligned in their favor. This delay proved crucial, though not for the mystical reasons Jiang Ziya claimed. During these years of preparation, the Shang dynasty was rotting from within. Dixin's character flaws, once merely personal failings, had begun to poison his entire kingdom. The king, who had once been a capable military leader, was becoming a tyrant consumed by his own appetites. The transformation began with a woman. When Dixin conquered the state of Yusu, he took as his prize a beautiful captive named Daji. What started as the simple claiming of a war trophy evolved into an obsession that would consume the king's attention and drain the empire's resources. Daji became more than just a favored concubine. She became the unofficial ruler of the Shang court. Under her influence, Dixin's priorities shifted dramatically. State affairs, once managed with precision and care, were neglected in favor of elaborate entertainments. The king, who had once led his armies personally, now spent his days devising new pleasures for his beloved consort. He constructed vast gardens filled with exotic animals because Daji enjoyed watching them. He commissioned musicians to create increasingly elaborate and suggestive performances because she found them amusing. Most infamously, Dixin created what became known as the Wine Lake and Meat Forest. This was not merely a lavish banquet, but a permanent installation where guests could wade through pools of wine while plucking roasted meat from artificial trees. The spectacle was designed to showcase the king's power and wealth, but it also demonstrated his complete disconnection from the struggles of his people. While the court indulged in these extravagances, the common people faced increasing hardship. Taxes rose to fund Dixin's projects, while the quality of governance declined. Officials, seeing their king's example, became increasingly corrupt and self-serving. Justice became a commodity to be bought and sold, rather than a principle to be upheld. But it was Daji's appetite for cruelty that truly turned the population against their rulers. She delighted in witnessing executions and tortures, laughing at the suffering of the condemned. Her most notorious creation was a device called the bronze toaster, a heated cylinder covered with oil where prisoners were forced to dance in agony to avoid burning their feet. As the metal grew hotter and the oil made footing impossible, victims would eventually fall into the burning coals below, all while Dixin and Daji watched and laughed. These displays of casual cruelty spread throughout the empire, carried by horrified witnesses and disgusted officials. The Shang dynasty, once respected for its strength and order, became synonymous with arbitrary violence and decadent waste. The contrast with the Zhou territories, where King Wu maintained his father's reputation for justice and fair dealing, became impossible to ignore. As reports of Shang excess reached Zhou lands, King Wu's support continued to grow. Warriors who had served the Shang began to desert, bringing with them detailed knowledge of military positions and troop strengths. Entire regions declared their intention to support the Zhou cause when the time came for action. Most critically, even within the Shang heartland, loyalty began to waver as people questioned whether Dixin still deserved their obedience. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would determine not just the fate of two kingdoms, but the future direction of Chinese civilization itself. By 1047 BCE, the signs were unmistakable. Across the vast territories of the Shang Empire, whispers of rebellion carried on every wind. In the markets of distant cities, merchants spoke in hushed tones about the Zhou prince who treated his people with respect. In the barracks of Shang garrisons, soldiers wondered aloud why they served a king who tortured innocents for entertainment. Even in the halls of the royal palace, courtiers began to question whether their loyalty was misplaced. King Wu watched these developments with the calculating eye of a born strategist. Unlike his father, who had been forced to work in secret, Wu found himself leading a movement that was gaining momentum with each passing month. Yet he understood that momentum alone would not topple the Shang dynasty. He needed the perfect moment, when his enemy would be at their weakest and his own forces at their strongest. That moment came in early 1046 BCE. Intelligence reports reached the Zhou capital with electrifying news. Dixin had committed the bulk of his professional army to a massive campaign in the east, leaving his heartland defended primarily by hastily armed slaves and conscripts. The Shang king, supremely confident in his numerical superiority, believed that even his reserve forces could handle any threat the Zhou might pose. This was exactly the miscalculation King Wu had been waiting for. Jiang Zia, now serving as Wu's chief strategist, recognized the opportunity immediately. The Shang army might still outnumber the Zhou forces, but numbers meant little when those soldiers had no desire to fight. An army of slaves, fighting to preserve the system that oppressed them, would crumble at the first sign of serious resistance. The Zhou mobilized with remarkable speed and efficiency. This was no desperate last stand, but a carefully orchestrated campaign that had been years in the making. King Wu's core force consisted of 300 elite chariots, each crewed by his most experienced warriors. Supporting them were 3,000 human troops, elite infantry whose loyalty to the Zhou cause was absolute. Beyond these professional soldiers marched 45,000 jiashi, citizen soldiers drawn from every Zhou territory, men who fought not for pay but for the promise of freedom from Shang tyranny. Yet the Zhou army was more than just a collection of troops from a single kingdom. This was a true coalition force, representing the hopes and grievances of multiple peoples who had suffered under Shang rule. Warriors from the Yong tribe brought their expertise in mountain warfare. The Shu contributed skilled archers whose accuracy was legendary throughout the Western territories. Fierce Qiang horsemen added mobility and shock power to Wu's forces. The Wu, Wei, Lu, Peng, and Pu peoples each sent their finest warriors, creating a diverse but unified army unlike anything the region had ever seen. What made this coalition truly formidable was not just its diversity, but its unity of purpose. These were not mercenaries fighting for gold or reluctant vassals, fulfilling feudal obligations. These were peoples who had chosen to risk everything for the chance to overthrow a system they despised. Their motivation was pure, their cause just, and their determination unshakable. The Zhou also possessed crucial technological and tactical advantages that would prove decisive in the coming battle. While the Shang still relied on traditional formations that kept chariots and infantry as separate units, the Zhou had developed innovative combined arms tactics. Their revolutionary military unit, called the Sheng, integrated one chariot with 30 infantry soldiers. 10 of these foot soldiers were heavily armored jiashi, with 3 designated to support the chariot crew and 7 trained to fight independently. This integration allowed for unprecedented coordination between mounted and dismounted forces. The Zhou chariots themselves represented the cutting edge of military technology, where Shang charioteers often operated independently, seeking individual glory through isolated charges. Zhou chariot crews fought as disciplined units. They had perfected the art of the coordinated assault, where multiple chariots would strike simultaneously at predetermined points in the enemy line. This massed chariot attack, supported by coordinated infantry advances, was a tactical innovation that the Shang had never encountered before. As the Zhou army began its march toward the Shang heartland, word of their approach spread like wildfire. In every village they passed, crowds gathered to watch the banners of liberation flutter in the morning breeze. Many observers noted something remarkable about this army. Unlike the grim professional soldiers of the Shang, these men sang as they marched. They carried themselves with the confidence of warriors who believed in their cause, who knew that they fought for something greater than themselves. The psychological impact of the Zhou advance was immediate and profound. Shang officials in outlying territories began to panic, sending increasingly desperate messages to the capital requesting reinforcements. Some simply abandoned their posts, fleeing eastward toward what they hoped would be safety. Others attempted to negotiate with Zhou advance parties, offering to surrender their positions in exchange for guarantees of fair treatment. Meanwhile, in the Shang capital of Yin, Di Xin finally began to grasp the magnitude of the threat facing his dynasty. The reports reaching him painted a picture that seemed impossible. How could a vassal state, even one as large as Zhou, field such a massive and apparently well-organized army? How had this rebellion grown so large without his knowledge? Most troubling of all, why were so many of his own territories declaring for the enemy without even putting up a fight? The answer to these questions lay in the fundamental difference between the two kingdoms. The Shang Empire was held together by force and fear, its subjects loyal only so long as resistance seemed hopeless. The Zhou coalition was bound by shared purpose and mutual respect, its soldiers fighting for a vision of the future they all wanted to see. When these two systems collided, there could be only one outcome. Di Xin's response revealed both his desperation and his fundamental misunderstanding of the situation. Unable to recall his professional army from the Eastern campaign, without abandoning those conquests entirely, he made the fateful decision to arm the slaves of his capital city. Nearly 170,000 slaves were hastily equipped with weapons and pressed into service as soldiers. On paper, this gave the Shang king a massive numerical advantage over the approaching Zhou forces. In reality, it handed King Wu the victory before the battle even began. The logic behind Di Xin's decision was fatally flawed. He assumed that sheer numbers would compensate for his soldiers' lack of training and motivation. He believed that even reluctant fighters would stand firm when faced with the prospect of death or slavery under new masters. Most critically, he failed to understand that these slaves saw the Zhou not as conquerors, but as liberators. Far from fearing defeat, many of his hastily armed defenders were actively hoping for it. As the two armies converged on the plain of Muye, near present-day Xinjiang, the stage was set for a confrontation that would reshape the ancient world. On one side stood the disciplined ranks of the Zhou coalition, their bronze weapons gleaming in the early morning light, their banners snapping proudly in the cold wind. On the other side, the massive but demoralized host of the Shang spread across the battlefield like a dark tide, impressive in its size but hollow at its core. The morning of the 20th of January, 1046 BCE dawned cold and clear over the plains of Muye. As the planet Jupiter reached its highest point in the sky, two armies faced each other across a stretch of ground that would soon be soaked with blood. King Wu stood at the front of his battle line, his bronze armor catching the early light. Around him, the banners of 8 allied peoples fluttered in the bitter wind. These were not the silk standards of pampered nobility, but the hard-won emblems of peoples who had suffered under Shang oppression and chosen to risk everything for freedom. The Zhou king raised his weapon, and 49,000 voices rose in a war cry that echoed across the plain like thunder. The battle that followed was swift and decisive. As the Zhou chariots thundered forward in perfect formation, the Shang lines collapsed almost instantly. Slaves who had been forced to fight for their oppressors threw down their weapons and fled to the Zhou side. Within hours, Di Xin's vast army had crumbled, the tyrant king retreating to his palace where he chose death over defeat, setting himself ablaze atop his tower of treasures. The Zhou had achieved the impossible, proving that courage and justice could triumph over corruption and tyranny. This single day at Muye didn't just end a dynasty, it birthed a new era that would shape China for 800 years and establish principles of righteous governance that echo through history. Sometimes the mightiest empires fall not to superior force, but to their own moral decay.